it's not only that they failed, it's like they never even really started the conversation about government spending that needed to happen. You can't cut defense spending. He's unwilling to even talk about cutting entitlement spending. Okay. Well, then there's no fiscal sanity here.
So recently, Dave Smith had a podcast talking about the perceived failings of Doge because Elon Musk has left Washington, the projections for cuts were far below projections, and there doesn't seem to be any interest in the Trump administration of codifying major cuts into law at all. So let's watch Dave talk about this and react. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
One of the things that I've thought was kind of interesting over the last few weeks, I guess this has been, a topic that's come up, and I think we did address briefly like some of this on the show, but it has to do with the new spending bill, which I guess has made it through the House. Is that where it's at right now, Rob? Is it through the House? Do you know?
I believe so. That sounds accurate.
Yes. Now, of course, Thomas Massie voted against it. It made it out of the House regardless, but of course Donald Trump took the opportunity to attack Thomas Massie, who is objectively more America first than Donald Trump. On Donald Trump's most America first day, he has not been as America first as Thomas Massie on his least America first day.
Yeah, and that's shown by Trump's propensity to endorse Lindsey Graham, but drag Massie multiple times when the latter actually stands up on principle in regard to government spending.
But it is there is something that's kind of interesting about this. Like, okay, there's a few things. Number one, I guess if you were to kind of zoom out, you would say there's nothing interesting about this. This is just par for the course. This is how government always operates. What are you telling me? Whoever's in the White House is going to sign a gigantic spending bill. The establishment hacks in Congress will all gladly put all of their pork into it, and Thomas Massie will vote against it, and it will go through. So, okay, on that level, it just seems very normal. But of course, what's different about this is that, number one, Donald Trump, he claimed, and many people around, or many of his supporters claimed, that he was kind of duped the first time. It would be different this time. Obviously, he had the whole Doge experiment behind him. But with all of that happening, essentially, we just got another giant spending bill crammed through. And I think, you see the CBO numbers on this, they're never right about anything. It's always worse than what the Congressional Budget Office says it's going to be. But even they are claiming it's going to raise the debt by $4 trillion over the next 10 years. It's just more of the same. None of the cuts that people were hoping might come through, and even the stuff they're talking about these tinkering around the edges, like maybe they're going to try to clean up a little bit of the fraud in Medicaid or something like that. Now, of course, I'll say it's interesting because when it comes to government spending, it's almost the only topic in politics today that's still so boring. Like everything else is like new and crazy and wild, but when it comes to government spending, it's the most boring arguments for it. It's the most boring criticisms against it. Of course, MSNBC could sit there and go, they're slashing government. They're kicking everybody off of welfare or something like this. But
yeah, what Dave said earlier is true. If Washington, D.C. had a theme, it's this time it'll be different. And that's, I guess, U.S. politics in general. This time it'll be different. Lots of Trump fans saying that in terms of spending. Trump's never seemed to have a sincere interest in cutting spending, by the way. And I hate to be cynical about this. I would have loved for Trump to be inaugurated and he actually to be taking a different path on these types of issues, but that's not what we have here. And instead, he seems to use his political acumen and his political popularity, which is essentially as high as I've seen probably in my lifetime since maybe the days after 9/11 for the Bush administration, or maybe some of Reagan's days, to actually drag fiscal hawks like Thomas Massie, like Rand Paul over this on Twitter and other platforms, and use his political power and popularity to whip Republicans to extend Biden-level spending under the CR. So that's what we have right now.
What we're really looking at is just, it's another meet the new boss, same as the old boss type deal here, where Donald Trump is going to demonize the only principled member of the House, or one of the very few. The Doge effort seems to have completely failed. And here we go off the fiscal cliff. This is on Donald Trump. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of people who you can blame and a lot of people who you can point fingers at, like a lot, you know.
Yeah, let's not be wrong. The Republican Congress is completely complicit with all this. They don't have to just echo what Donald Trump says. I get that it's tough to do that. It's tough to buck what he says and go against it for sure in terms of political purposes. But it's not like they're honor bound and legally bound to do what he wants in terms of spending bills. The Congress has the power of the purse, not the president. But the president does seem to just guide the Congress, and the Congress gives him almost unlimited deference outside of a few people.
This is Washington, D.C. afterward, and we're talking about, when you're talking about government spending, you're talking about what is D.C.'s budget. And so obviously there's a lot of forces in DC who are like, we'd like our budget to be as high as possible. Like, you know, kind of to be expected, but it kind of just can't be overstated how much this is on Donald Trump. And that the actual issue is that first of all, Donald Trump doesn't know anything about anything, and he doesn't actually have deep convictions about any of this stuff. I mean, he never really had any deep convictions about getting to the bottom of government corruption or draining the swamp, for that matter, which again, I've made this point a lot over the years, but it is a really important one, so I'll make it once more here. Government spending is the swamp. That's the swamp. You want to drain the swamp, then you have to cut government spending. You want to continue the swamp, you continue government spending. You want to increase the swamp, increase government spending. That's what it is. Like, these are very basic things, which, by the way, Elon Musk does understand, because he has several times tweeted videos of Milton Friedman making this exact point. So, like, he does have some understanding of sound economics, but it's like this, right?
Yeah, I think Dave's right here. When it comes to draining the swamp, for all the rhetoric there, not only is it to cut spending, it's also to eliminate bureaucracies. And that doesn't mean reform. You can't reform evil and come away with non-evil. And there hasn't even been reforms of these intelligence agencies, including the ones that played a role in trying to frame him for treason, like the FBI and DOJ. Instead, he just puts, his trusted loyalists in place that, in the run-up to the election say, hey, we're going to release the Epstein files, Black Book, day one, and all this stuff, and then never do that, by the way. That's what's been going on.
Government spending is the tax. It doesn't matter what your tax rate is. The real measure of taxation is government spending, because in order for government to spend, the government has three mechanisms by which they can spend money. Number one, they can tax you, and they can spend the money that they've taxed from you. Number two, they can borrow the money, and essentially borrowing the money is just promising to tax you in the future. So they're borrowing against their tax slaves, which are us. And if they borrow, they can pay it back with what they can tax us from. And then the third mechanism is to print money. And printing money is essentially a tax too. It's, it's just a tax paid in a different form. They're just robbing your purchasing power in order to spend money.
Yeah, that's exactly what they do. That's the job of the Federal Reserve, is to impose a tax that in some ways is the least palatable tax because it's not even legislated. Politicians don't even have to raise taxes these days in this corrupt financial system. They just have to have the central banking oligarchy print more money, expand the monetary supply, and that devalues the remaining money that exists. We've seen this in the last few years, especially when the Fed created almost half of the dollars that exist today in a single year during the COVID regime. I think that was between 2020 and 2021 to finance CARES and other things. And that, you know, had sweeping ramifications that were negative on the American populace.
And so, by the way, this is the reason why, you know, if anyone else did what government does, it'd be a crime. The reason why counterfeiting money is a crime is because you are robbing from everybody else. It's not just like counterfeiting shouldn't be illegal if this wasn't the case. You know, it's not like if you can counterfeit money, it's not like you just found a cheat code and now you get free stuff. You're robbing from everybody else by lowering the value of their money to get it for yourself. So that's what government's doing.
Yeah.
They're doing the same thing, okay? So if you understand that all government can do is tax you or promise to tax you in the future, then that's what government spending is. And when you talk about the swamp, I mean, what is the swamp? The swamp is that Washington, D.C. is filled with the most corrupt monsters in the goddamn world, and that they only get money and resources from extracting it from the American workers. The American working people have to have their money stolen from them, to extracted to these criminals in DC so that they can spend their money on all types of corrupt and destructive shit. You have, if you look through it, all the, the richest districts in America, and you see how many of them are right in the suburbs, right outside of Washington, D.C. Well, why is that? It's not because they have great big factories in Washington and they're producing so much stuff. It's not like, hey, this is capitalism, man. They're the ones who are making all the goods and services that everyone else wants to buy. No, in fact, they make no goods and services that anybody would voluntarily want to buy. They make war. They make,
They make the surveillance state, the extortion apparatus, the war machine, like Dave noted. It's nothing that the American consumers want in a voluntary condition, that's for sure. Like he's saying,
bunch of grants for green energy companies, but that's the whole essence. That's government spending. Okay, that it is the swamp. And the reason why this is so clearly on Donald Trump, and I will say that it seems to me in Trump 2.0, in the second Donald Trump presidency, 47, not 45, Donald Trump seems to, and there might be some, it might be somewhat reasonable in some areas why he went this tack, but Donald Trump has been very focused on executive orders. He's been very focused on executive fiat. He seemed to be somewhat focused on this Doge thing, which was a creation of the executive. And not so much with Congress. Now, on some level, you might say that, Congress is corrupt and Congress has failed on all of these things, so he's pursuing these other means. But the reason why I point this out is to make it very clear, because there's really no passing the buck here. Donald Trump, this Doge thing, first of all, was very popular with the American people. And Donald Trump was in a position, when Donald Trump has, when he first came in for his second term, and he has record high approval ratings for Trump, his highest approval ratings ever. When he's north of 50% in terms of his approval rating. You have to understand what that means is that Donald Trump's approval rating amongst Republicans is in the high 90s. Like Donald Trump came in where the Republicans are all behind him. And what that means is that Donald Trump has enormous leverage over the Congress. Like if he wanted to, he could pick a few issues and go straight, instead of blasting Thomas Massey for having some fucking principles, he could have said, listen, every goddamn Republican who's in the Congress, every single one of you have said you care about limited government. You've said you're against big government, you're for small government, you're for, balancing the budget, you're against this fiscal insanity. He could have been like, look, here's the DOGE bill. I'm presenting it to Congress. There's nothing in this. It's a 3-page bill that says we're going to meet DOGE's spending cuts, recommendations. And if any Republican votes against it, we're primarying you.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think this is Dave's best point so far in this entire video. Trump's political leverage is enormous. He has a mandate as far as Republicans are concerned, and their party controls both houses. So instead of using his leverage to push it in that direction where there needs to be spending cuts, and maybe Massey has it right, he's done the exact opposite and actually used his political might, his political leverage, to drag the people that actually want to stand up for eliminating government spending and curtailing the excesses and the fraud and, getting to the bottom of this, that we're going off a fiscal cliff. I think Musk understands it. When Musk tweeted about, how, I tried my best in a recent reply to talking about Doge, it seems to come off kind of somber, like he really did his best. We know that Musk did have speeches in front of Trump's cabinet saying, hey guys, this is really serious. We have to cut spending. And no one seems to listen. The Congress doesn't even listen. The people that are closest to you or supposed to be closest to you are won over more by national lobbies than they are you, clearly. There's only one representative for each about 800,000 people at this point. Congress isn't truly representative, and this is just another way that it's proving it.
Donald Trump is going to keep a list and expose them for the frauds they are, and they'd have to fall in line. They would have had no choice. The thing is, he just doesn't care about the issue that much. He liked having Elon Musk around the campaign. He liked the energy that brought. He liked having a guy who would give him a couple $100 million. He liked having a guy who would make sure his message is spread far and wide on X, make sure his people aren't censored, things like that. But at the end of it, he just didn't really care about cutting government spending. And the thing that's so frustrating, Rob, is that Donald Trump does seem to have, look, he's in this situation here that's so unique. Not only having such a high approval rating amongst Republicans, having the ability to put pressure on them, but also he doesn't have another election to win. He doesn't have to worry about getting reelected. And
Right, he doesn't have to placate the big government leftists and progressives that want to spend enormously more money on free stuff, which is never free, by the way. It's always extracted from someone else. But he doesn't have to worry about those concerns anymore. But he still doesn't care. And that's why he's a big government Republican. That's why a lot of people call it the uniparty. There's very low amounts of differences between the two parties, despite all the theatrics outside of maybe abortion and immigration. That's about it. And even there's not much of a change in policy in Washington right now.
He's even said with the tariff stuff that he's willing to take some short-term pain to have a bigger overall correction that would put America on more solid ground. But he just doesn't know enough to know that the only way to actually do that, or the most important thing, would be to hack up government spending and government regulations. That's the thing that, while not the regulations, but while spending, there might be some short-term pain. And I'm not even sure there would be too much of that, to be honest. But
me neither.
It would put us on a long-term, like on solid footing. And yet he just doesn't choose to care about this issue. So I'm sorry, this is on Donald Trump now. And that's that. My instincts from the very beginning were that Doge was not going to be successful, that Doge was essentially a made-up government department, but I was like, well, look, maybe this will be great. They'll at least get the issue addressed, and they'll get people talking about government spending again.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. I had that exact same thought because Musk controls the biggest news source in the world right now. That is what X is. And all of this ability to project these ideas to the masses, it's an insanely big asset, and it's a megaphone. It's a messaging megaphone to communicate this to the American people. And I think that was actually, at the beginning, pretty successfully done. That's why Doge was so popular with the masses. even the corporate media had to run these polls showing that, despite their, propensity to say the sky is falling, everyone's going to be kicked off of all these entitlement schemes and such. They wouldn't call them schemes, of course, but you know what I'm talking about. And they had to actually show these polls a few times about how popular it actually was. So Dave's right on the money here.
And then there was, now I will say, as I said this on the show, but I had dinner with Vivek Ramaswamy. He was really high on Doge. He was like, nah, dude, we're going to blow you away. There's going to be some great things we're going to do. A few weeks later, he was out of Doge, but regardless, I am humble enough to go like, all right, look, I have my preconceived notions. I have my views on things, but look, obviously, like, Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy are incredibly brilliant, incredibly successful people. It's like, hey, maybe these guys actually got something figured out that I don't know about, and they're going to be able to maneuver away here. But
yeah, that's kind of what I thought too. Not only because both of them have been successful in the business world, not only running Tesla and Twitter/X and SpaceX, and on Vivek's side, Roivant, successful companies. I thought that their actions in those roles actually showed that maybe some of this is possible, and maybe I'm being too much of a cynic, because when Musk stepped into the offices in Twitter in California, I think he cut like 70% of the workforce, something like that, 50 to 70%. I'd have to check my numbers on that. But he cut a significant amount of the workforce to go along with him in, for the future of Twitter and what became X. So he had shown a record of doing just that in the business world, or being willing to do that. Of course, it's a little bit different here when you don't have all the levers at your disposal. Congress presumably does in many regard, but it doesn't seem like he was able to even convince that many people in the bureaucracy that this was the way to go, this in the Trump administration.
That didn't end up happening. And now, to the point that you made before, Rob, there is, it's true that when you were selling the thing as fraud and abuse, it's perhaps true that this was a more palatable way to sell cuts in government spending, to point out the fact that, hey, look, there are these areas that we all agree, like everyone agrees there shouldn't be fraud in Medicare. So, okay, like maybe we have a difference of opinion about, whether Medicare is a good program or Medicaid's a good program or not, but we could all agree on the fraud. And look, we found all this fraud and USAID and all these other things. And so, yeah, okay, maybe there's like a wider audience that would accept that than just arguing for spending cuts because we need fiscal sanity. But the problem is that when you sell it that way and then you fail anyway, then you kind of get the worst of both worlds. Because number one, you failed to get any spending cuts anyway. But number two, you didn't even really educate the public about government spending. And I mean, look, Elon did some of this. Like I said, he was sharing some great, Milton Friedman, Thomas Sowell videos and stuff like that. But I just feel like it's not only that they failed, it's like they never even really started the conversation about government spending that needed to happen. Like they never even really got into it, where it was like, look, like, first of all, Donald.
Yeah, I mostly agree. I think in the early days of the Trump administration, you did see some of that. Musk was out there a lot in the White House at some points, broadcasting some of this, and definitely on his Twitter over the course of a long amount of time. But after they got into office and that he set up the Doge office, it just didn't seem to, catch on, despite all the popularity. But Washington's a different beast, and that beast will always want to grow government. Washington rarely ceases to occupy territory that it chooses to occupy. There's not many even instances of that happening during the entire course of this country's history. So
Donald Trump is sitting here advocating for $1 trillion defense budget. So clearly he's not interested in cutting defense. He wants to increase defense spending, which is, of course, a unnecessary and just a terrible policy. But then on top of that, it's like, what are we, if you're never going to, you can't cut defense spending. He's unwilling to even talk about cutting entitlement spending. Okay. well, then there's no fiscal sanity here. And the idea that, like it's almost like Elon Musk, maybe without ever saying it, but it certainly was pretty heavily implied that somehow like we could get our fiscal house in order without ever dealing with defense or entitlements, but just from finding like fraud, just from finding like, USAID spending money on trannies in Afghanistan. We'll balance the budget off cutting that. But that was always just made up. That's not true. I'm not saying there's no fraud. There's tons of it. But the real thing is that the whole thing is fraudulent. The whole government is based off fraud. All of it. Look, all of these entitlement programs are they're wealth transfer programs from a poorer group to a richer group. It's the most goddamn corrupt thing in the world.
Yeah, that's the truth, and that's at the heart of government. If I was to steel man someone that's a Trump defender right now, I would say like, hey, Doge has on their website, you can go to doge.gov and see the fact that they're saving $100 billion. Well, that's true, but not in net, because after that was publicized, they introduced the $1 trillion Pentagon budget for the first time. Not only that, Pete Hegseth boasted about the size of it on his Twitter. He said, look at this. This means we're serious about defense. When it doesn't mean that at all. It means you're serious about foreign military operations and regime change schemes and proxy wars. That's what that means. Because it wouldn't take that amount to defend the American homeland. The American homeland isn't under threat right now in a serious way from any power, including the most powerful powers other than the United States, Russia and China in particular. So to boast about that when this is supposed to be small government Republicans is crazy. Now, Massey was right, because USAID, that was exposed by the Trump administration. I've given him a lot of credit for that, for dismantling USAID. A lot of us didn't see that coming. And that's super important because it was the regime change arm of the CIA. And it spent hundreds of millions of dollars and billions of dollars, actually, even before Putin's invasion of Ukraine, on funding the Maidan coup and then money leading up to 2022, and $15 billion to Syria over the course of 10 years in an apparent regime change operation called Operation Timber Sycamore that had the U.S. siding with Al-Qaeda enemies, the ones that attacked us on 9/11 or attacked the homeland on 9/11, funding them against Assad because Assad was a no-no guy. CIA wanted him out, so did Israel, and that's why the U.S. was so hell-bent on it. Now, they didn't get it at the time, but they did end up getting it at the end of 2024. So, that's where we're at. We're being pushed off the financial cliff, and, it's not pretty, because the Republicans sure seem complicit with it. Not only do they just seem complicit with it, and they don't have to drag Massey, who stands up for these principles of smaller government, they could remain silent and still get their legislation through. But instead, many of the MAGA acolytes go to Twitter and drag Massey and call him a Democrat for actually standing up for lesser spending. So that's where we're at. But I do want to hear from you guys. Was there anything amazing that came out of Doge that I failed to mention or Dave failed to mention? Or what do you think about Doge? Did it fail? Did it succeed in any way? Am I too hard on it? Let me know in a comment down below. And until next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and I'll catch you guys next time.